My name is Helena Moore. I'm 36 years old, a senior financial officer for a nonprofit based in Illinois. I've balanced spreadsheets bigger than some families' annual budgets. I've forecasted crisis recovery plans through 2 recessions. I've been praised for always staying calm under pressure. But none of that prepared me for what it felt like to bury my 4-year-old daughter alone. Ellie was my entire world. Her favorite color was yellow. Her laugh sounded like tiny chimes caught in spring wind, and she insisted every stuffed animal in her room needed its own bedtime story. She died from acute viral encephalitis just 3 days after her first fever. One minute, I was making her toast. The next, I was standing over a pediatric ICU bed watching the lines on a monitor go flat. I organized everything myself. The funeral home, the flowers, the casket that looked too small even for a child, the paperwork, the burial plot, the photographs. I even picked out the music Ellie loved, the lullaby version of You Are My Sunshine. So I asked the pianist to play it twice. I didn't do it because I was strong. I did it because no one else would. There were 23 chairs set out at her service. Most of them were empty. My parents weren't there. My sister wasn't there. No cousins, no aunts. No one from my family showed up. I stood beside Ellie's tiny casket, numb, holding a photo of her in her favorite rain boots, yellow of course, while the wind blew hard enough to lift the edges of my coat. I looked out at those empty chairs and something inside me just snapped quietly. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just one clean break, like a thread that had stretched too long under pressure. The pastor tried to offer comfort, speaking softly about Ellie's joy and her laughter. He talked about how children like her were heaven's purest gifts. I barely heard him. My eyes were locked on the horizon beyond the graveyard fence, where I imagined the sun rising over blue waters and white stone villas. Because at that exact moment, my family was in Santorini, sipping cocktails by the sea, smiling in matching resort clothes. They had paid $900 for that vacation, a vacation that apparently meant more than saying goodbye to my daughter. You see, when I called them, when I told them Ellie had died, my mother said, "Oh, Helena, I'm so sorry." But her voice was more annoyed than sad, like I'd called during dinner. Then she added, "But you're strong. You've always been the strong one in this family. You'll get through this just like you always do." My father didn't even take the phone. He told Mom to tell me he was thinking of me, but that they had already booked the flights. The package was non-refundable. $9,900. That's what my daughter's funeral cost them on paper. And Madison? My sister. She said something I'll never forget. She said, "Look, I'm pregnant. I need this vacation before the baby comes. Your child's death isn't my responsibility." And then she hung up. So I buried Ellie without them. No family, no comforting arms. Just me. One friend from work who stayed 5 minutes too long, and a pianist who didn't know how to look me in the eyes after the final note. I went home that night with the funeral program still clutched in my coat pocket like a receipt for pain no one wanted to pay. That was the moment I truly knew, that some families don't break in one big explosion. They rot slowly, quietly, from the inside out. And sometimes the real betrayal isn't screaming or slamming doors. It's silence. It's absence. I stood there by Ellie's grave, staring down at her name etched into stone. The wind had died down. There was a strange, warm stillness, like the earth itself was holding its breath. And I whispered to no one, "You didn't deserve this." But I promise you, they won't get to walk away untouched. The call to Madison happened the day after Ellie passed. I didn't want to make it. My hands shook holding the phone. But I thought foolishly that blood still meant something. That maybe in the face of death, some part of her would remember how we used to build blanket forts as kids. How I gave her my prom dress. How I paid for her wedding. The line rang 4 times. Then she answered. "Cheerful? Hell. What's up?" Her voice was light, almost sing-songy. "Madison," I said, "Ellie, she's gone." There was a pause. No gasp, no sharp inhale. "Oh," she said. "Wow." Another pause. Then I'm really sorry to hear that, but you know I'm pregnant, right? I've been so nauseous, I can barely keep food down. I need to keep my stress levels down. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She continued, "Look, I get that you're hurting, but this is your situation, not mine. Ellie wasn't my daughter. Don't try to make me feel guilty." Her words landed with surgical precision. I'd heard sharp things before, but this was scalpel deep. "I'm leaving for Greece in 2 days," she added. "Troy already prepaid everything. It's non-refundable, and honestly, I need this trip. It might be the last time I relax before the baby comes." My voice didn't work. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just listened to her breathe calmly, evenly, like nothing monumental had been said. She finished with, "I hope you find peace, sis." "Really, I do, but don't put your grief on the rest of us." Click. She was gone. And in that moment, the room around me felt colder than death itself. Not because I'd lost Ellie, but because I realized I never had a real sister to begin with. What I had was someone who took love, resources, attention, and years of support, and gave nothing back when it mattered most. I wasn't the kind of woman who missed deadlines, forgot birthdays, or left her gas tank on empty. My name is Helena Moore. I had a color-coded Google Calendar, a 5-year investment strategy, and an emergency fund that I never touched until the year my husband got sick. I was the kind of person other people called when their credit cards maxed out, when their taxes got messy, or when they wanted to brainstorm a business idea that never went anywhere. I didn't mind not at first. Being useful made me feel secure, valued, like I was holding the family together with invisible thread and Excel formulas. I worked as a senior financial officer at a mid-sized nonprofit that funded early education programs in underserved neighborhoods. It didn't make me rich, but it gave me purpose. I was known for staying calm when others panicked. I never carried debt. I refinanced our mortgage at just the right time, and I made sure every penny Daniel and I earned was working for us. When Daniel got sick, I made a spreadsheet for his treatment plan. 3 tabs, one for insurance coverage, one for out-of-pocket projections, and one I didn't let him see where I silently calculated how long we could survive on one income if things went south. I was 6 months ahead on bills. I liquidated our vacation fund. I stopped buying anything I couldn't justify under the column necessary. My parents were proud of me in the way people are proud of a reliable car. They didn't offer help, but they'd brag to their friends that I'd figured it all out on my own. "Helena's the smart one," they'd say. "She's got everything under control," which is exactly why they came to me when they needed money. When their roof leaked, Helena paid the contractor. When their Medicare didn't cover a new medication, Helena covered the gap. When Madison and Troy's credit was too low to buy a used car, Helena co-signed the loan. No one ever called just to ask how I was holding up. They didn't see my planning as a form of love. They saw it as a convenience. I was the walking contingency plan, the invisible net, the person they only noticed when I wasn't there to catch them. There was no formal thank you, no repayment, not even a holiday card with a gift card inside. They'd say, "You're so good with money," as if that excused them from ever thinking about how hard I worked for every dollar. I carried it all quietly because I believe that's what family did. We helped, we provided, we made life easier for each other when we could. I didn't realize until much later that what I'd built wasn't trust, it was dependency. And once I could no longer give, they no longer saw value in keeping me close. That understanding didn't come with a loud confrontation. It came slowly, like water leaking through a cracked pipe. I ignored it at first, too busy managing everything else to notice the dampness growing beneath my feet. But looking back now, the signs were there. The storm had already started forming. I just didn't hear the thunder because I was too busy holding the umbrella over everyone else. Daniel was the kind of man who believed he'd live to 95. He jogged every morning, grilled vegetables instead of red meat, and refused to touch soda. He was cautious, steady, and thoughtful in a way that made people trust him instantly. He was also the only person who ever looked at me and said, "You don't have to carry everything alone." He was wrong about living to 95. When he got sick, it wasn't gradual. It was a sharp turn off a cliff. One routine checkup turned into a referral. One scan turned into a biopsy. One cough turned into a 6-word sentence that changed everything you have. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I didn't cry when I heard it. I didn't fall apart. I went home, opened my laptop, and started running numbers. I called the insurance company the same day and requested a full breakdown of coverage. I made a binder with tabs labeled Primary Oncologist Second Opinions Treatment Options, Financial Forecasts. I remember sitting with Daniel on the bed reading through side effects while he stared at the wall like it was suddenly foreign. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Not just of our life together, but of every safety net I thought we had. Our savings disappeared fast. Insurance covered the basics, but not the specialists he needed. Clinical trials weren't local, and travel costs stacked up fast. I sold my car and downgraded. I canceled Ellie's preschool gymnastics and let go of our part-time babysitter. I worked remotely between appointments, answering emails in hospital waiting rooms and running payroll from parking lots. And I never asked my family for a dime. At first, I didn't think I had to. I thought they'd see what was happening and step in. But all I got were excuses polite and polished. Mom said, "Your dad and I are on a fixed income, sweetheart. We want to help, but you know how tight things are." And then she added, "You've always been resourceful. If anyone can figure this out, it's you." Dad barely said anything, just nodded in the background, looking vaguely uncomfortable, like the mention of illness was somehow impolite. I tried once with Madison. I asked if she could help by driving Ellie to daycare a few mornings so I could take Daniel to treatment without dragging a toddler along. She laughed and said, "Oh, hell, I'd love to help, but things are crazy right now. Troy and I are opening our cafe soon, and you know how startups are." She was always about to launch something, a cafe, an online store, a brand. But somehow her rent was always late, and her credit card statements always got mailed to me by mistake. So I stopped asking. I stretched what we had. I took on quiet freelance work in the evenings, reviewing small business budgets and cleaning up tax records for clients I met through mutual friends. I didn't tell Daniel everything. He had enough to carry, but he knew. One night, as I was closing my laptop at 2:00 a.m., he looked at me from his pillow and whispered, "I'm sorry I can't protect you from all of this." I kissed his forehead and said, "You don't have to. Just be here." But 3 months later, he wasn't. He passed on a Tuesday. Rainy. Quiet. The hospice nurse cried harder than Madison did when I called her. And the same week, Daniel died. Our mortgage payment bounced for the first time. That was when I realized I had not only become the emotional anchor, I had become the wallet, the backup plan, the financial fix-it-all for my husband, my child, and a family that had never once offered to hold the weight I carried. I wasn't a person to them. I was a service. Planning a child's funeral is something no parent should ever have to do. Doing it alone adds a kind of ache that feels less like pain and more like erosion. Quiet, slow, relentless. That's how it felt when I sat at my dining room table surrounded by papers and brochures trying to figure out how to bury my daughter without anyone else's input, without even their presence. I chose white lilies because Ellie once said they looked like princess trumpets. I picked a small ivory casket with silver trim, not because I liked it, but because it looked the least cold. The funeral home director offered me tissues, then showed me a catalog of child-sized urns in case I changed my mind later. I booked a pastor I found online, one who didn't know us. Didn't know Ellie, didn't know anything beyond the basic facts I emailed him the night before. He spoke gently on the phone, asked what kind of tone I wanted for the service. I said, not cheerful, not grim, just soft. He didn't ask about the father. He must have assumed I was divorced or widowed or simply alone. I didn't correct him. What difference would it make? I designed the funeral program myself using an old template from Canva. I chose a photo of Ellie in her sunflower dress holding a red balloon. She was missing a front tooth in the picture. Her smile was so wide it made her eyes squint shut. Underneath it I wrote, "In loving memory of Eleanor Grace Moore, 4 years, 2 months, 5 days. You were and always will be the brightest color in my world. I printed 10 copies, even though I only expected 5 people to come. I ordered sandwiches and small pastries from a local bakery. Nothing fancy, just something people could eat without needing a plate. I didn't want to host a reception. I didn't want to pretend this was a gathering. I wanted the world to stop spinning for once, just long enough for me to scream silently. While I was confirming final details with the funeral home, I had a flashback. It came uninvited, as they always do. Madison's wedding, 3 years earlier. Outdoor ceremony. Rose gold theme. Custom signage, engraved flutes, a live string quartet. I had paid for all of it. $12,000. Not as a loan, not as a gift, but because Madison cried on my couch one night and said I just wanted to feel magical hell. Like someone believes in me. I believed in her. And I thought maybe that belief would come back around when I needed it. It didn't. She didn't even offer to send flowers for Ellie. As I wrote the guest list, really just a list of names I felt obligated to invite, I stared at a blank space under family. No one from my side would be there. No one even offered to help plan. They didn't ask which cemetery I chose. They didn't ask if I wanted company at the viewing. They didn't ask anything. It was as if Ellie had disappeared not just from the world, but from the family record. Like her death was a personal inconvenience, something to be glossed over in favor of vacation photos and baby showers. That realization hit harder than any of their words, because it wasn't just grief anymore. It was betrayal. The night before Ellie's funeral, I couldn't sleep. I had triple-checked the casket delivery confirmed the flower order and laid out the tiny sunflower dress I'd chosen for her last goodbye. My hands were numb from folding programs, and my eyes burned from not blinking enough. The silence in the house felt heavier than ever. The kind that presses on your chest until you wonder if it's physical or something else entirely. I reached for my phone. I didn't know why. Maybe out of habit. Maybe because I wanted anyone to acknowledge what tomorrow would be. I didn't expect comfort, but I hoped for a small sign that someone out there still remembered Ellie existed. Instead, I opened Instagram and saw a story posted 5 minutes earlier. It was Madison. Of course it was. She was standing on a white sand beach in Santorini, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a mimosa. Her red bikini barely covered her growing baby bump. She wore oversized sunglasses and a smirk that I knew too well. It was her look how perfect my life is face. The caption read, "Finally free 2 words, a kiss emoji, and a sun." That was what my daughter's death meant to her. Freedom, sunshine, a good tan, and a break from responsibility. I stared at the screen for a full minute, hoping for a second post. Maybe one that said, "Thinking of my niece today," or "Wish we could be there." Something, anything. But there was nothing else. Just that story, that image, that headline carved directly into my chest. I clicked through to the next frame. My parents were seated at a seaside cafe, laughing with Troy, her husband. My mother raised her wine glass to the camera. My father was mid-laugh, his hand resting casually on the table, like he hadn't said just days earlier, "You're strong enough to cope alone." I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. I set it down slowly, screen side down, and walked to the living room. Ellie's photo was still on the mantle, her school portrait from last fall, her curls wild because she refused to let me brush them that morning. Her eyes sparkled with something fearless. She was wearing a pink dinosaur shirt she picked out herself. Her smile was crooked, imperfect, and radiant. I picked up the frame and sat on the floor, holding it to my chest like a shield. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was empty, not even hollow, just stripped. As if every thread that tethered me to the people I called family had been cut at once, and I hadn't realized until I tried to reach for one and found nothing there. That caption looped in my mind like a cursed mantra. Finally free. Free from what? From empathy, from effort, from showing up. I tried to rationalize it as I always had. Madison was pregnant. Maybe she didn't know how to express grief. Maybe my parents were trying to stay strong for her. Maybe. But no. I stopped myself. That's how I'd always justified their behavior. Maybe. Maybe they just didn't care the way I thought they did. I went back to the dining table and placed Ellie's photo in the center next to the folded funeral programs. I looked at her smile one more time and I said out loud, "They chose the beach. I choose you." I turned off my phone, and I didn't turn it back on again until after the burial. The morning after Ellie's funeral, I woke up before sunrise. I hadn't slept much, barely 2 hours. My body felt leaden, but my mind was sharp, painfully awake. There was no ceremony to plan now, no errands to distract me, just the kind of quiet that forces you to confront everything you've avoided. I made a cup of coffee I didn't finish and walked into my home office. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly until I saw the folder on my desktop, Family Support, active.xlsx. I opened it. It was color-coded like all my documents. Green for recurring transfers, yellow for one-time assistance, red for temporary loans that had quietly become permanent. The first tab was titled, Parents, $1,000 per month for 36 months. For essentials, as they had called it. That meant car insurance, prescription supplements, small repairs they didn't want to dip into their retirement savings for. I had never questioned it. They'd raised me, hadn't they? They were aging. Helping them felt like a responsibility, and sometimes like penance. For what I still don't know, then came the Madison plus Troy tab. $6,800 for their daughter's preschool tuition, the one Madison wanted to send to the same private Montessori Ellie had been waitlisted for. "I just want her to get a head start," she'd said. I remember nodding, smiling, and wiring the money that same night. $18,000 to co-sign a car loan for Troy. His credit was shot. I had excellent credit. He'd promised to refinance in his name after 6 months. That was 2 years ago. Another $2,400 to cover unexpected licensing fees when Madison and Troy tried opening their cafe, the one that never actually opened. Sprinkled between were smaller charges of $180 monthly for Madison's therapy app subscription, $350 for Troy's work laptop after his was stolen, $500 to cover overdrafts just for the weekend. Each entry had a date, a reason. Some even had email receipts attached. I documented everything. Not for reimbursement, but for clarity. Because I didn't want to ever be the kind of person who resented her own generosity. But that morning, I felt it. Not just resentment, humiliation. I'd given over $78,000 to the people who didn't bother showing up when I buried my daughter. Not one of them had said we'll pay for the flowers. Not one had offered to cover the reception. Not one asked if I had enough left in the account after everything. They had taken, again and again. And when I had nothing left to give, when the one thing I needed from them wasn't money, but presence, they chose the beach. I stared at the final total in the bottom corner of the spreadsheet, $78,475.34. The number pulsed on the screen like it was alive. I turned in my chair and looked at the photo of Ellie still sitting on the shelf. Her sunflower dress, her gap-toothed smile, her bright, unfiltered joy. She had never known bitterness. She had never learned how much people could fail you. I picked up the photo frame and held it to my chest. My hands shook not from sadness, but from the clarity cutting through the grief. That number didn't just represent money. It represented my silence, my complicity, my belief that if I just gave enough, maybe they'd love me the way I wanted to be loved. But they didn't. And they wouldn't. And I finally saw that. I set the frame back down, turned back to the screen and clicked Save As. New file name, end of support, final.xlsx. Then I reached for my phone. And this time I wasn't checking for messages. I was making a list, a different kind of list. 2 days after I closed the file and renamed it End of Support. Final. I decided to pay a quiet visit to the downtown apartment where my parents had been living rent-free for the past 3 years. I hadn't been there since the pandemic began. They said it was safer that way. I believed them. The apartment was mine legally. Daniel and I bought it shortly after our wedding. It was supposed to be our investment property, a small space in a quiet building with historic character and stable tenants. When Daniel died, I inherited full ownership. A few months later, my parents complained about their old house being too much upkeep. Without thinking, I handed them the keys. They never paid rent. Not once. I told myself it was okay. They were aging, I could afford it. And they were family. But that day, standing on the steps of the building, I still paid property taxes on something felt different. The paint on the front door was chipped. Cigarette butts littered the front steps, and a red Solo cup sat abandoned on the railing. I hesitated before pressing the buzzer. A neighbor opened the door and glanced at me with mild suspicion. I offered a polite smile and stepped inside. The hallway smelled like burnt food and perfume. My heels echoed against the hardwood floor as I climbed to the third level. As I approached the unit, I heard laughter loud and unmistakably coming from my mother. I knocked. My father opened the door wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and holding a beer. His face flickered with surprise, then concern. "Helena." "What are you doing here?" I needed to check on the place. I said simply. "Is now a bad time?" Behind him, I could see my mother on the couch watching a reality TV show with the volume cranked. There were takeout containers on the coffee table and a large dog one I'd never seen sniffing through an open grocery bag. Before he could answer, someone cleared their throat behind me. I turned to find a uniformed officer standing in the hallway, hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am," he said, nodding politely. "You a tenant here?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm the owner." He seemed slightly relieved. "Apologies. We had a noise complaint called in from the second floor. Said the tenants in 3B were hosting loud game nights past midnight. I just needed to confirm who's responsible for the unit." I blinked. Game nights tenants. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother pretended not to hear. The dog barked twice and knocked over a soda can. That's when it hit me. They didn't treat this apartment like a temporary place or a gift. They treated it like territory, like entitlement, like they'd been handed something and forgotten who handed it to them. I looked at the officer and said, "Thank you for letting me know. I'll handle it." He nodded and left. I turned back to my father. "We'll need to talk soon, about terms, about boundaries." He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. Not angry, just done. As I walked away, I passed the small brass plaque near the mailbox. Unit 3B, H. Moore. Still my name, still my responsibility, but no longer my burden. I did it all in one afternoon. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened every banking portal, every auto draft, every scheduled payment I'd created over the years. It was strange how quiet it was. No music, no news playing in the background. Just the sound of my fingers tapping across the keyboard and the faint hum of my monitor. Quiet, but not peaceful. No, this was surgical, focused, controlled. First, I canceled the recurring $1,000 transfer to my parents' account. The system asked me if I was sure. I clicked yes. Then it asked again, "Are you absolutely certain you want to delete this recurring payment?" Yes, absolutely. Then I moved on to Madison. Her daughter's tuition draft canceled, her emergency therapy subscription gone. I removed myself as co-signer from Troy's car loan. I had built enough legal leverage, enough written documentation to make the case. It would impact my credit a little, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't living for their approval. I was surviving despite their consumption. Each click was like loosening a noose I hadn't known I was wearing. Once the logistics were complete, I drafted 3 letters. Not emails, actual letters on thick paper, signed and notarized. The first was to my parents. Effective immediately, all financial support from me has ceased. The apartment lease will not be renewed, and all utilities associated with my name will be transferred or discontinued by the end of the month. I trust you will make arrangements accordingly. I kept it simple. Cold, perhaps, but not cruel, just clear. The second letter went to Madison. You once said Ellie wasn't your responsibility, that her death was not your burden to carry. So let me say this plainly, my wallet isn't yours to carry anymore either. This is the last transaction between us. The third was to my attorney. It contained instructions to begin formal procedures on reclaiming the apartment under my legal ownership and drafting a cease and desist if any financial demands followed. After mailing them, I opened my email and typed a message that took only 1 minute to write, but echoed years of swallowed hurt. To madison.troyemail.com, subject on your words. You said Ellie wasn't your responsibility. Now neither is my money. Good luck with the vacation. Helena, I hit send and didn't reread it. Didn't wonder how she'd react. I just stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out the window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. What I felt was still, like a lake that had stopped rippling, like a room where the fan had finally stopped spinning after years of constant hum. This wasn't revenge. It was release. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bleeding cash to buy peace. I wasn't negotiating with my own worth. I had simply closed the valve, quietly, completely, as if it had never been open. The documents arrived on a Thursday, an unassuming white envelope in my mailbox, stamped with the seal of the IRS, and addressed to me as Helena Moore, registered agent. I already knew what it was before I opened it. I had suspected for months quietly in the back of my mind, but now it was in my hands. Confirmed. Troy had used my name and my residential address to register his defunct cafe as an active business on his tax returns. Not once, not twice, but 3 consecutive years. He claimed deductions for home office use consulting fees and even listed me as advisor. I stared at the return summaries attached, line after line of fiction posing as accounting. I wasn't just angry. I was insulted. He had taken my profession, my pride, and twisted it into something dirty, something dishonest, as if being his family made me an automatic accomplice. I sat at my kitchen table and took out a legal pad. On the top of the page, I wrote, "What would I tell a client to do?" Because that's how I survive moments like these. I step out of my pain. I go back to the facts. I become the version of myself I respect. I pulled up the documentation. I printed archived emails. I made copies of every receipt he had ever forwarded me just in case. He'd been sloppy, too arrogant to think I'd ever question him. The next morning, I made 2 calls. First, to the IRS fraud reporting line. I spoke slowly, clearly. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't accusatory. I just told the truth, that I was a CPA, that my name and address had been used without permission, that I had reason to believe the deductions were false. Second, to my attorney. I forwarded the documents, and we began preparing a civil filing for identity misuse and financial misrepresentation. Not criminal, just enough to sever legal ties and make the court formally recognize the abuse. I didn't ask for jail time. I didn't want a trial. I wanted space, boundaries, clarity. A week later, Madison called me in a rage. "You reported us to the IRS." You know what that does to someone's life. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I said, "You used my name, my home, my license, and you never asked. You only assumed." She screamed something else, I can't even remember what, and then hung up. I didn't call her back, because I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing what I'd do for any client who'd been taken advantage of. I was doing my job. And more importantly, I was protecting my name, my profession, my future. I didn't need them in jail. I didn't want headlines. I just wanted peace. And for the first time, I wasn't buying it for anyone else. I was earning it for myself. The first call came at 2:17 p.m. I remember it because I was filing receipts for a nonprofit grant audit, and I had just closed Ellie's photo album on my desk. The phone lit up with Madison's name. I stared at it for a few seconds before picking up. I knew what it would be about. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about Ellie. She didn't even say hello. "Are you insane?" she shrieked. "I'm pregnant, Helena. I need a place to stay. What the hell are you doing, cutting everyone off like that?" Her voice was sharp, sharp like betrayal, sharp like entitlement dressed in panic. But it wasn't the desperation that stung. It was the familiarity of it, as if she was returning to a contract I had never signed. "I sent you the notice," I said, calm but clear. 30 days. In writing, notarized. "You think that makes it okay?" She barked. "This is my baby, this is your nephew. Do you want him born homeless?" I closed my eyes. "You went to Greece while I buried Ellie alone. That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." She inhaled sharply, but I kept going. "You told me word for word. Her death is your problem. I'm pregnant. I need this vacation. And now you're asking me to clean up your next problem. You're punishing me for something I said when I was overwhelmed. I buried my child Madison." Silence. I was overwhelmed too. Her tone changed. Manipulation bleeding through. "You're not thinking straight. This grief, it's making you cold." "No," I replied. "It's making me honest." She scoffed. "You're acting like you're better than all of us." "No, I'm acting like I'm done." She hung up. 17 minutes later, Troy called. He didn't yell. He sneered. "Seriously, Helena, you report us. You freeze everything over what some child that's not even here anymore." I felt something in my throat twist, but I didn't let it show. Her name, I said, was Ellie. She was 4, and she was everything to me. "You're destroying this family for a dead kid." "You get that right?" "No," I answered steady. "This family destroyed itself. I'm just the one who stopped pretending otherwise." He laughed cruel and hollow. "And you think this makes you noble, Saint Helena?" "No," I said again. "It makes me someone who finally stopped paying to be unloved." He paused. That quiet, stunned pause when the truth cuts through the game. "You always needed control." "No," I corrected. "I needed peace." But for too long, I let people confuse the two. Troy snapped. "You're going to regret this. I already regret giving you 36 months of my life and over $70,000 without once being asked how I was doing." He cursed and hung up. I stared at the screen as it went black. The silence felt like a door finally closed. They were back from their $900 vacation, back to their lives, and for the first time, I was no longer a line item on their personal budgets. I wasn't their emergency fund. I wasn't their fallback plan. I was just Helena Moore, the woman who buried her daughter alone, and who was finally learning how to live without needing anyone's permission. They showed up on a Sunday afternoon. Cold air, gray skies, the kind of stillness that made even the wind feel afraid to move. I was boiling a cup of tea when I heard the tires screech. Madison's voice pierced the air before the knock even came. I didn't flinch. I opened the door slowly. She was there, 7 months pregnant, face-flushed mascara smudged as if she'd just been crying or had tried to make it look like she had. Troy stood slightly behind her arms, cross-jaw clenched like he thought that'd make him look more powerful. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said quietly. Not to them, mostly to myself. And it was true. Madison didn't waste a second. "You've ruined everything," she cried, stepping forward. "You think just because you're grieving you can destroy lives. My baby's due in 6 weeks. You think this is the time to make us homeless? Technically, I said I stopped subsidizing your vacations and your rent. That's not the same as making you homeless." She pointed a finger at me, shaking. "You're jealous. Admit it. You're bitter. Your daughter died, and mine's alive." That sentence sliced through the porch air like broken glass. Even Troy's face twitched in disbelief. But me, I stood very still. "Yes," I said, voice calm like a steel wire pulled tight. "I'm bitter. I'm grieving. I buried my 4-year-old. But what I'm doing now has nothing to do with jealousy. It's about finally recognizing that grief should never have been funded by someone's silence." Madison's lip trembled, but she didn't back down. "You think you're better than us, don't you? You always have." "No," I said, glancing at the blinking red light on the recorder inside the hallway. "I don't think I'm better. I just know I deserve better than what I've accepted for the last 3 years. "Your family," Troy growled. "You don't turn your back on family." "That's funny," I said, taking a step back into the doorway, "because when Ellie was dying and then gone, you all turned your backs just fine." Madison's hands flew up. I told you I was pregnant and overwhelmed, I nodded. And I was burying my child. Alone. While you wore red bikinis and toasted cocktails with captions that read, "Finally free." She flushed. That was just a post. You're taking it out of context. I stared at her. I have no energy left to interpret people's cruelty as misunderstanding. You're heartless, she snapped. No, just finished. Troy shook his head. You're cold. You always were. It's why Daniel kept things from you. He said. I raised a hand, stopping him. Don't say his name. Not from your mouth. Not today. He closed it. I looked between them. Two people I once considered my blood, now strangers. And still they were asking for more. More money, more forgiveness, more of my soul. But I had nothing left for them. And I didn't feel guilty. I don't need either of you in jail, I said. I don't need revenge. I just want you out of my life. Fully. Permanently. And if we don't go quietly, Troy asked. I stepped aside again, revealing the glowing red light. Then we all go public. Madison looked like she might cry. But I didn't reach out. For once, I let the silence sit. You'll die alone, she whispered. No, I said. I buried my daughter alone. Everything since has just been living. And then I closed the door gently, firmly. Inside, the silence was warm. The kettle still hummed. My tea had gone cold, but it didn't matter. The recording had captured everything. Not for court, not for revenge, just so I'd never forget how far I had come from the woman who once begged to be treated as family. They didn't get what they wanted from me in person. So like most people who crave attention and validation, they took it online. 3 days after I closed the door in their face, Madison posted a photo on Facebook. She stood on a balcony, belly round, beneath a flowing dress, eyes glassy with emotion and light, hitting her just right, carefully staged like a sympathy painting. The caption read, "Some people choose grief to justify cruelty. Pregnancy is hard, especially when your only sister abandons you when you need her most. Family shouldn't come with conditions." She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. Her friends gushed about how strong she was. Old high school acquaintances chimed in with vague but supportive affirmations. You've always been the kind one. Sending love. You deserve better. I remember your sister. She was always a little cold. I sat at my desk, sipping cold coffee, watching it unfold like a stage play I'd already memorized. Then something changed. About 30 comments, and someone named Valerie, an old neighbor from when we were kids, wrote, "Didn't Helena pay for your wedding reception? And your prenatal classes, too." That comment hung like a stone in water. For a few minutes, no one replied. Then another dropped in from Anthony, one of Troy's old coworkers. "Didn't she also cover your back rent a couple years ago, just asking?" It was subtle, but the tone of the thread shifted. Another person chimed in. "I remember her raising funds for Ellie's treatment alone while you were on vacation, Madison. That was last summer, wasn't it?" Screenshots began circulating in replies. One showed Madison's now-deleted bikini post from Santorini, captioned, "Finally free," posted the week of Ellie's funeral. Another was an old thank you message she'd sent me. "Thank you for everything, sis. I don't know where I'd be without your help covering the down payment." Madison tried to salvage the situation. "It's more complicated than that," she replied under several comments. She wasn't always like this. Something in her broke. Someone fired back. Maybe it broke when her daughter died and no one showed up to the funeral. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The truth had started defending itself. By the time I checked again that evening, the tone had changed entirely. People weren't attacking her, but they weren't comforting her either. Her own narrative had unraveled. The next morning, the post was gone. No apology, no explanation. Just vanished like it had never existed. That afternoon, I received a private message. It was from Marie, a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. She wrote, "I saw what happened. I didn't know about Ellie. I'm sorry. Truly. And I'm proud of you for standing tall through all of this. I didn't cry often anymore, But that message unlocked something. I didn't sob. I just sat very still and let a few tears roll quietly, cleansing, not crushing. Not out of sadness, but out of something else. Relief. It felt like after months, years, even of being buried beneath guilt, silence, and manipulation, the world had finally seen me, not through their words, but through the echoes of what I had actually done quietly without applause. And that was enough. I had never expected anyone to speak up for me. I was used to the silence, the quiet after funerals, the hollow ring of phones that never called back the way my inbox filled only when someone needed something. But that week, something changed. The morning after Madison deleted her post, I got a message from Ms. Jennings, Ellie's preschool teacher. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Her message was short, but it hit me like lightning. Helena, I don't know what's happening online, but I was at Ellie's funeral. You were alone. That shouldn't have happened. I just wanted you to know someone saw it. And it broke my heart too. I thanked her quietly. Then she made her post public. It read, "As Ellie's teacher, I watched Helena raise her daughter with grace, even as life threw unimaginable pain at her. I was there when we said goodbye to Ellie. I didn't see any other Moore family member in attendance. And that's not gossip. That's a fact." The post didn't go viral, but it didn't have to. It landed exactly where it needed to. The next to speak up was David, my old neighbor, from when Daniel was alive. He'd helped us shovel snow the winter Daniel got too weak to do it himself. His comment on Ms. Jennings' post was simple: "I remember the day Daniel died. I remember Helena alone at the mailbox, holding herself up like it was the only thing left standing with her. If her family had been helping, I sure never saw them." It was raw, it was real, and it was irrefutable. People I hadn't heard from in years started chiming in. An old friend of Daniel's who'd flown in from Arizona for the funeral posted a photo from the service. The pews were mostly empty. He wrote, "I sat beside Helena while she buried her daughter. Madison was tagged in beach photos that same day. If you're still wondering who was cruel, you're asking the wrong question." Another post came from Ruth, one of the donors from the nonprofit I used to work with. Helena helped fundraise for 3 schools and a food bank. When her daughter got sick, she didn't ask anyone for a dime. But when her family turned their backs, she still didn't badmouth them. That's dignity. That's strength. I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't reply, repost, or share. I didn't even like the comments. But I read every single one. Every sentence felt like a tiny thread stitching something torn inside me. Not revenge, not validation, just truth. Finally, the truth was walking out into the light wearing the voices of those who had been silent too long. Then came the final blow. A woman named Grace posted an image of a group text shared with permission, she said, from a mutual friend of Madison's. The message was from my sister a week before Ellie's funeral. It read, "I swear if I have to cancel this Santorini trip because Helena's kid died, I'll scream. It's not like she hasn't always been dramatic." That message spread, not because it was shocking, but because it sounded exactly like her. The damage wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic. It was slow, thorough, and deserved. I never wrote a word in my defense. The world had already started doing it for me. And this time I didn't feel guilty for letting it. I sold the house in early spring. The same house where Ellie took her first steps across the kitchen tiles. The same hallway where I once knelt shaking after Daniel's diagnosis. The same front porch I stood on the morning no one came to my daughter's funeral. It wasn't bitterness that drove me. It was space. Space to breathe. Space to reclaim what grief and betrayal had slowly stripped from me. People warned me that house holds memories. I know. But it also held ghosts. And not the kind that comfort. I remember the day the real estate sign went up. I stood across the street watching the agent hammer it into the frozen soil. I had this strange urge to apologize to the house, as if I was abandoning it. But then I thought of Ellie's laugh echoing through rooms now silent. And I realized something: memories don't live in drywall or shingles. They live in us. And Ellie, my little Ellie, was coming with me. I packed slowly, not out of reluctance, but reverence. Every toy, every crayon-stained drawing, every photograph, I wrapped them with care. Not like relics of the past, but treasures I would carry forward. When I found Daniel's old wristwatch in the back of a drawer, I sat down and let myself cry. Not out of pain, but release. For years, I had carried everything: financial burdens, family guilt, even death without complaint. This time, I let the tears come. Just me and the ticking reminder of a man who once believed in me when no one else did. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't owe an explanation. Not anymore. The closing paperwork was signed at a quiet law office downtown. The woman who bought the house smiled gently, unaware she was taking over a battlefield disguised as a bungalow. I wished her well, sincerely. May her memories be lighter. I moved into a modest rental in a quiet coastal town 2 states away. No family, no headlines, just the sea and a breeze that didn't carry accusations. I framed Ellie's last painting and placed it near my window. It was a bright sun with lopsided rays and a blue sky full of dots she insisted were friendly clouds. Each morning I open the curtains and whisper, "Good morning, sunshine," to the version of her that still exists in every color she ever chose. I've started working again, remote accounting jobs for nonprofits that still fight the good fight. The hours are lighter. The silence now feels peaceful instead of punishing. Sometimes I pass playgrounds and pause, not in sorrow, but in memory. I let myself smile, because even if my time with Ellie was short, it was never small. She made me better. Even now, she keeps making me better. I no longer need to justify what happened. I no longer wait for apologies that will never come. And I certainly don't grieve the loss of people who were never truly present to begin with. I grieve the right things now. And I love the right things too. I'm not the same woman I was in that cemetery, clutching a folded dress and a silence heavy enough to crush ribs. I'm not her anymore. But I thank her, because she survived long enough for me to arrive here. I kept a notebook by my bedside. Each night I'd write a letter to Ellie. Sometimes just a sentence, sometimes 3 pages. I didn't censor myself. I told her what I ate, what I saw, who I forgave, who I didn't. I told her about the birds on the balcony rail and the neighbor's cat who thought my windowsill was his runway. I told her about the moment I no longer cried brushing her name. I began scanning those entries, compiling them into a little digital journal. Then I started volunteering quietly, remotely, for an organization supporting children who had lost one or both parents. One day, I sent them a copy of Ellie's journal. I didn't expect them to read it, but a week later they wrote back. Helena, the message said, "We printed out your letters and left them in the children's reading room. One boy reads one every night before bed. He says it reminds him that love doesn't die, it just changes homes." I didn't reply. I just sat still for a long time, staring out the window, hearing the wind play with the chimes. I started baking again. I don't know why that matters, but it does. The smell of cinnamon and brown sugar felt like a second chance. I didn't bake for anyone. I just let the apartment fill with something warm. There was no dramatic ending, no tearful reunion, no courtroom showdown, just me quietly rebuilding a life one good choice at a time. The apologies never came. And honestly, I stopped needing them. Madison had her child. My parents returned to their routine, whatever version of reality they chose to live in. And I kept living. I read books again. I took walks at dusk. I laughed at dumb movies. And I kept writing to Ellie. One night, I wrote the last entry. I closed the journal and said aloud, "Sweetheart, you can rest now. Mommy's okay, because I am. Not perfect, not whole, but okay." I've learned something no book or sermon ever taught me: freedom doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from no longer owing anyone your pain. And if someone out there watching this is sitting in the dark, wondering if they'll ever stand again, I'll say this: you will. You don't have to forgive those who stepped on your grief. You don't have to return to people who never showed up. You don't have to perform healing for an audience that never deserved your story. You just have to breathe. And one day, you'll find you're still here, still standing, still capable of joy. I don't need them to apologize. I just needed to know that someone who once buried her child alone could still dig herself out and live again. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.